We'll get started on our panel session, which is all around how do we make community-led research and innovation really impactful in places, however defined, as I think some of our panelists will reflect. You're laughing already, aren't you, Claire, because of the debate we had over the tea break. I'm Kersten England, and I'm very proud to be chair of the Young Foundation. But I have a bit of a kind of like portfolio existence in which means I do lots of different things. I'm also the co-director of something called the Yorkshire Policy Innovation Partners, which is also funded by UKRI. So 2 reasons to be here and fascinated by the debates that we've had over today. Now, as many of you know, the Young Foundation is a charity firmly based on the principle of social justice and enabling people to flourish and to have agency, influence and power, and to work together across all sectors for the common good. And I'm afraid, you know, without kind of being too hackneyed, to work for the greatest good with the least ill created. It's kind of the principle is how do we enable everybody to flourish in their own lives, to be at their best, but also to work together to make common cause. And of course, the agenda, therefore, of community-led research and innovation sits at the heart of that. I'm absolutely delighted that we are overseeing and managing the community knowledge programme, but really digging into how do we enable communities to bring their knowledge, their agency, their influence to bear, to make changes which they initiate and they take control and charge of, to initiate, but also and to challenge the policy, the wider policy-making process, and to have real influence in policy-making processes, and how to participate on an equal footing. I think that, and we may get into this, with parity of esteem with policymakers, politicians, and academics. And I want to get into some of the tough questions around that maybe this afternoon, because I think we live in quite turbulent and uncertain times where some of the discussions we're having today, I think we need to connect to some of the wider disconnect that is happening between communities and the state, and where that's leading us to in terms of populist politics, and also to have a debate about how we make common cause to make disruptive change, and to recognise that some within communities deeply desire and want to lead change around that, and others in communities will resist and oppose. And how do we work around all of those issues as well? I've worked with these agendas for a long time. I should confess, I'm a recovering chief executive. I was in local government for 14 years, latterly as chief executive of Bradford, and I've really witnessed the power of commitment to community-led research and innovation around a 20-year journey we've been making through something called Born in Bradford, which illustrates for me that you can start with anything and go everywhere in thinking about how you create flourishing lives, because that was born from a deep concern in our place about acutely high levels of infant mortality. But it has become the world's largest study of childhood development, with 60,000 people as active researchers within that programme over the last 20 years. And that's the 18,000 children and their parents and carers who own their data. It's their DNA, it's their social, it's their economic, it's their environmental data, and actively participate in the research. And the power of that has enabled us, for one thing, to draw down about £120 million worth of funding. And that's funding from Wellcome, Sport England, Arts Council, Big Lottery, and AHR, because the work we are doing is so credible that it can be deployed in all kinds of ways. And through that, we've redesigned neighbourhoods, we've introduced charging clean air zones, we've developed food strategies, we've influenced planning policies, and also participation in culture and sport. And actually, Sport England just published some work last week that showed how it's called Jump, Join Us, Move, Play, has shifted the dial in the way that no other programme they funded has on the physical participation of kids at primary school, where, of course, one of the other real issues is the chronic level of diabetes in our community. But through redesigning neighbourhoods for physical activity and mobility and participation and access to food, we're shifting the dial. So I've seen the power of that work. But as I said, I'm also co-director of YPIP. I've got some of my co-conspirators in the audience, Sammy and Kate, I can see in the audience, where we are both engaging in co-designed research around data, access to data, transition to net zero, inclusive growth, sustainable futures in the creative economy. But we are also investing in community-led research and innovation. And Sammy and Kate helped us make decisions recently around an £800 million fund to invest in community-led research right across Yorkshire around those themes. And we're going to look at the interplay between co-designed research and community-led research, which might be something we also come to talk about. But look, you're not here essentially to listen to me. We have a great panel who are going to reflect on how we support effective community-led research and innovation that can make meaningful change for communities in their places, grappling and engaging with complex systems, different players, vested interests. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Lauren Baker-Mitchell, who is here from Northumbria University, and as she said, is just coming back from maternity leave and had to ditch a jacket due to her 3-month-old depositing on it. So that's lived experience for you. So, you know, we're absolutely delighted that you are here with us today, and she's going to reflect on the Arts Humanities Research Council funding around creativity and using creativity to drive social innovation and change by communities. We've also got on my left here, Clair Griffiths from Xplore in Wrexham. We had this discussion about the fact that Bradford became city culture and Wrexham was a runner-up, but next time, I'm sure it will happen. 2029, I'm sure it'll happen, who was working on the Mindsets and Missions programme, so which we heard a bit about in the last panel, actually, from the Science Discovery Centre, and you're going to reflect on all of that work. And last but not least, we've got Sarah Pearson here on my left, a fellow person from Yorkshire. From Sheffield, Hallam, you fly the flag for Yorkshire, who's working on the fairly newly funded, I think it's fair to say, Centre for Collaboration in Community Connectedness. Has it got, is it acronym C4? C4, yeah. Having been part of the bid team to bring Channel 4 to Yorkshire, it's a bit confusing for me, but there you go. Not to be confused with the channel. Ah, okay. I didn't know that. Well, I've learned something. Didn't know that bit about the explosive. So, and look, in the objective for this panel is really twofold. We're getting into the how, I think. Yeah, I think we've established the power and the potential of all this. How do you make it happen? What gets in the way? What are the enabling conditions really for making this work? And I guess we addressing two different types of audience: those who are already actively involved in research and innovation and want to really understand the opportunities of working on community-led research and innovation in place. And then the second thing is for those who are, if you like, more working at place level. And we heard from a colleague from a combined authority in the last. I'm hoping in the audience there are more people from, you know, either NHS institutions or local authorities, combined authorities, those that have place as a focus and trying to create prosperity in place. How can they work more effectively to support community-led research and innovation? So I have two questions to kick us off. And we'll probably go to Lauren first and come to each of you in turn. I'm about 5 minutes just for you to get in the room, introduce yourselves, and just share a little bit about why you think place, however you define it, is important for your way of working. And given your experiences thus far, and I know, Sarah, this is a new project, but you've done lots of similar sorts of work, based on your experiences of place-based working, what would be your advice or recommendations to people who are interested, whether they're working in academia, whether they're working in local authorities, whether they're working actually in, the third sector, to support and nurture capacity for community-driven research and innovation. So, Lauren, over to you.
Yes, hello, thank you. This is my first time using a handheld mic.
Yeah, they're not the best. I like Donna ones myself,
Well, yeah, maybe any type of mic. So yes, hello, hi, my name's Lauren, and I'm Senior Research Fellow for the AHRC Creative Communities Programme. We're based at Northumbria University, which is in Newcastle in the northeast of England, but we are a UK-wide programme. To start off with, I guess it would be really useful for me to kind of define what do we mean when we say creative community, which could be taken in any manner and is quite a common phrase now, actually. But we define it in the programme as the coming together of diverse, maybe unlikely partners. So that's universities, academia, yes, research organisations, but also government, local government, combined authorities, charities, industry, community groups, third sector, coming together around shared goals, challenges, issues, and using cultural and creative activity to co-create new ideas, innovations, solutions, ways of moving forward. So very much focused around ideas of transformation and positive change. And we see this as kind of beneficial because, it's a more inclusive way of working, particularly from an academic perspective. It opens up a whole host of opportunities that you've kind of heard about today around more relevant ways of, relevant forms of research, but also can kind of help inform things like policy development and infrastructural change, systems change, particularly in the face of devolution and new ways of working, as these kind of combined authorities are being formed, as devolved nations are kind of looking to kind of solidify the way they're working, as an opportunity for more inclusive innovation and growth and ways of working. So that's what we define as a creative community. And within that place is obviously absolutely foundational to that kind of ways of working, because as we all know, place comes with a whole host of its own stories, social fabric, assets, physical places, but also culture and emotions as well. And that kind of creative community way of working has to sort of really properly represent, I suppose, authentically that kind of place, identity, a context and identity where these communities exist. And so, excuse me if my mind goes a little bit blank because I've been awake since 2:15 this morning.
You're doing great, Kerry. Keep going.
So yeah, place is foundational for us in this sort of scenario, and for us, when we kind of were exploring creative communities and where they exist, we found that actually there's a bit of inequity in terms of that geographical spread of where this kind of creative community work was happening and where the funding was arriving. And that was why we launched the Community Innovation Practitioner Pilot, or Awards now as we call it. And that's the kind of stream that I lead on. And it looks particularly at this kind of model of working, of co-creation, and it's a devolved funding pot ultimately. And we ran a pilot of this, which saw 5 very different creative communities take on the role of a community innovation practitioner. So that's embedded in existing research that does this kind of creative community working, but the community innovation practitioner, or CIP for short, is a dedicated person there to capture co-creation processes, because ultimately this kind of way of working, although it has great potential, there's not a one-size-fits-all way of doing this kind of work. And so we really wanted to try and understand what are the mechanisms to make that happen in place, what are the kind of unique sort of processes that can go that a creative community in place, or a community of interest or otherwise, can go through to kind of really unpack this and address whatever particular issues that they're experiencing themselves, in the understanding that it's really contextual. And that's what we did. So over the course of a year, we had 5 across the UK, each kind of unpacking their unique journeys over a year. And
Do you want to just bring to life for us?
Mm,
Because there's a lot of language there, isn't it? Community innovation
sorry,
practitioner and
yeah.
creative community and co-creation. So just give
Mm.
us the story of one of those, just for example. This
Yeah,
is how
so
it
this
worked. This is what happened.
Yeah, so this is a really important point to make, which is I want to be mindful that I'm telling the stories of somebody else and their partners and their teams and their communities. But I think the most successful kind of CIP activities were the ones that really had embedded researchers that were kind of that community and could speak directly to that kind of notion of lived experience. I think there was a time where we were going to be the CIPs ourselves within our research team, and we realised that was wildly inappropriate. And following the notion of kind of roots, not parachutes, wanted to kind of invest in people in those spaces. And so an example is in the Market, a community in Belfast in Northern Ireland. We had a CIP.
Oh, so a quick shout out
I
here.
Market.
Pete is our local coordinator for community research network. Hi, Sarah.
Anya is a community leader in that space, and she had worked previously with QCAP and other universities in that area and other organisations in that area, but in particular was looking to address cycles of silence and trauma around substance use. And she did that with the Market Development Association and a number of other kind of cultural partners, and through hosting kind of regular hot meal nights basically with her community, was able to kind of build intergenerational groups, so a young person's group and an older person's group, to talk about their experiences of living in the market, and start to unpack them using different kind of creative activities. So that included like poetry, photography, and they collectively co-created a exhibition that was called the People's Tapestry. You can find videos about this on the QCAP website and on their YouTube, and also on all of the organisations' Facebooks, and it's on the Creative Communities website as well, which I can definitely recommend you look into. But it's a real example of how something fairly small, so the funding for the CIPs wasn't massive. It was around £53,000.
53,000.
53.
Just so we're clear, yeah.
But that that money and that work from Anya and all the partners involved really they were able to spend a lot of time really building trust relationships in that community, speaking with people, getting to know them, embedding them. Obviously, there was already that existing relationship there, which I think was really vital. And their collective kind of activity in launching that exhibition and having those discussions about their experience really kind of changed their personal view around how they felt about living in the market, around what they wanted for the market for the future, and also just kind of on an individual level kind of changed their relationship also with QUB as a university. I think it's really easy for institutions to forget that they can have quite sometimes not the most positive relationship with people in place, trying to be diplomatic there, and actually investing that time and that consistency in place to kind of build relationships is so vital. But it's so easily forgotten and turns into that extractive work. And actually what you found with QUB and QCAP and what Anya was able to do with all the partners and MDA and Pang and Ban and others that she's working with was really start to turn that relationship around.
Fab. And it
and
sounds
make
like
people
it's
feel
been a
like
catalyst for lots more to happen, isn't
so much more in terms, there's the other side as well, which is the kind of traditional impact side, which is like how much follow-on funding they get and how many people they engaged. But ultimately, I think the really important impact was felt emotionally by the community, by their friends and their neighbours and everybody involved in that exhibition. So that's kind of like a tangible example of what we have been working on with the CIPs.
Brill. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Laura. Brilliant for someone who's sleep deprived
Thank
with
you.
a 12-week-old baby. That's amazing. So look, I'm going to come to you now, Claire, and just get that microphone. Just hear a bit about your experience and how you define place, really, and also what you think you've learned and what recommendations you'd have for everybody who wants to kind of make progress on this agenda.
Okay, cool. So I'm Claire. I'm from Xplore Science Discovery Centre in Wrexham, which probably won't make sense to a lot of you. So have you all been to a museum? I'm assuming so. Yeah. Hands up if you have. There we go. Get you doing it. You know the kids floor on a museum where you get there and your kids just want to just go crazy and everything you can be touched and does something. That's what Xplore is, but it's the whole building. So everything in our space you can touch, you can move, it does something, and it has a science theory or discipline or some crossover with something within science or STEM or STEAM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And the A in STEAM is
Much better if it's STEAM, in my view.
Yeah, STEAM is better, definitely, because it opens the pores. So just to explain what the acronym was. So I'm the community outreach coordinator, and a couple of years ago we had the opportunity to apply to a program of work called Mindsets and Missions, and it was all very scary because they said, however you would normally shape your project, you can't do that way. Don't come with an idea, just come with an open mind. And it was like, oh, seriously? So we all went, we learned some bits and bobs, and then we got to shape our project from there. And they used this very scary term called co-produced, and no one really knew what that meant or how we were going to do it. Somehow we got funded. I think our funding must have been, our application must have been really good, because we kind of set out what we were going to do, because there was no end goal in mind. Now, coming from a science centre, everything is science. So we engage people in science and we talk about science all the time. And Mindsets and Missions had nothing to do with science. So it was really scary as an organisation that we were told to go to a group and just ask them what they wanted to do, and it didn't have to be science related. And we ended up with 4 amazing groups and 4 amazing projects. One of the, I suppose for this panel, one of the lessons that I took away is that a place can literally be anywhere. So we had one particular group, which was a Kim Inspire group. So they're like a mental health charity for adults. And the group of gentlemen and ladies that came to us, I asked them the first meeting, I was like, what can I do? Because they wanted to have their sessions in our centre. So we weren't going to them, they were coming to us, which was different within the project anyway. I was like, what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? Instantly I got shouted at. I was like, I want bourbon biscuits, Garibaldi's, like, can we have some custard creams, please? Someone else like Jaffa cakes, like, I'm gluten intolerant. Can we have something for me? And I was like, yes, biscuits we can do. So it was quite interesting that I went across from that. I tried to make it like I was inviting them into my home. Seemed like when you have someone come visit and you're like, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a biscuit? Have a seat, make yourself at home. We tried to do that in our space. So we got some cushions, made it all nice and soft. We put like a bit of a poster on the screens, like, welcome Kim Inspire. And we did like a little bit of an icebreaker every day before we actually got down to the nitty gritty of the research of what we were actually trying to do. And I think that made a massive difference because it made our space become their home. And then when we went somewhere else with the other groups, we did the same thing, and we made ourselves at home in their space. So we brought the tea, the coffee, the biscuits, we brought cushions, and we brought what they called, the big things called bean bags. I forgot what bean bag was called then for a second. Like massive bean bags that we could sit on, so that people were just kind of relaxed and we could just chill. And then it didn't seem so scary doing research. I'm not a researcher at all. I wouldn't say I am. But after talking to Lauren all day, I realised that maybe I am just a little bit with all my individual little projects. So to try and make our place seem more like their place, we tried to make the groups feel comfortable. And then we did that within our science centre. But that had a huge impact to our organisation. So a lot of the people that I work with were like, what are you doing? Why have you brought beanbags? Why do you need so many custard creams? And I was like, well, it's going to make the project so much better. So our organisation's had a complete shift change. We used to dictate to community groups what we wanted them to do. It's like, we're doing this project, we found this fund and we've got this idea and we want to have this in the end. We don't do that anymore. So from this project, we start off by getting a community group in place before we even apply, and we name them in the bid, and then we put a contribution to that community group within our bid as well. So we're not paying them for their time, but we're contributing towards them so that they can actually take the time out of whatever it is that their day-to-day job is, whether it's working with just that community group or if they're doing something else, they've actually got the time to sit and reflect and spend time on the project that I would really like them to do. But we shape it with them as well. So from the very beginning right the way through to the end, they are involved. There's still those projects where we're like, we just need one more group. Like, we'll just apply and we'll hope for the best. But yeah, so we try as much as we can do now to shape it with the community group, so that then we don't randomly come around like, hi, I've got like 20 grand to work with your group for 6 months. Is that okay? And they go, no, we're doing something else instead. We also found that the staff who worked on the project have changed completely. So we had 4 groups. We had 2 staff members per group that were leading, and I was looking after all 8 of them. Out of the 8 staff members, 6 of them were deathly scared of going into a session with a group and not having any kind of outcome, because they're like, well, what do we do? And I was like, well, ask them, figure it out, do some co-production with them, sit down and do a theory of change, like figure out what it is that they want, and then we will go from there. And they all did it beautifully. One of my colleagues, because we have to highlight the negatives as well as the positives, was like, I ain't doing this is ridiculous, I don't see the point, like I cannot. And he was a research scientist that had come to join us. By the 3rd session, he was so involved with that group, literally couldn't get him away. So he ended up talking to he was with a group of adults that are living with dementia and their carers, and there was a mixture of men and women on the older community. He kind of took the guys off to one side and was like, right, what do you want to do? And then the women kind of went to the other side of the room, was like, what do you want to do? And they did that themselves. We didn't segregate them. And they ended up doing like a bit of a tinkering session. They were like, all we want to do is tinker. The amount of engines that I had to try and find for that project for people to take apart, it's a really weird thing to ask a scrapyard, do you have an engine you don't need? They were like, what for? I'm like, it doesn't matter, it can be anything, just a toaster, just give me something that they can take apart. But they ended up, from that project, they wanted to capture their stories, and we couldn't figure out a way to do it apart from making basically a little exhibit box where they press a button, and then whatever they've experienced through the project, it's in their voice telling them about it, because a lot of them forgot what we were doing. We got to like halfway through and they were like, I don't know what we did last time, but I know I enjoyed it. And it was almost like, we need to start capturing what they're doing and recording it. So the guys in the session, they did like some electronics, and they built the electronic panels ready, like for us to load all of the voice notes onto. And then the ladies were designing what the box would look like. There was so many arguments, and you had to dodge custard creams as they were flying across the room. But it was really great, because at the end of it, then they could go back and like they were like, oh, what did we do? And it's like, press a button. It's like, oh, that's me. My name's John. I pressed my name there, and John's telling me what I did. And I'm like, yeah, like we did this like 3-4 weeks ago. It was fantastic. But they all kind of reflected on what they did and how much fun they had. And there was a lot of stories from when they were at school, and that a lot of the ladies didn't get to do science because it was never something that women got to do back then. And then the men were kind of reflecting on the fact that they got to do kitchen science, because we did a kitchen science session where we made oblek, which is, I don't know the actual word for it is now. Oh, what's it called? Cornflower glue. That's it.
Well
See,
done.
I'm with the kids now. Oblek. So we got to make that, and then we were talking about like cooking and things like that. So it was really fantastic. It was lovely. So the things that I would kind of say as
to draw
advice,
from all that.
draw from all that, it's their choice. So a community group, they know what they want. They're just too afraid to tell you half the time, or you've not given them the space to actually say, it's okay if you want something different to me. So listen to them. With it being their voice as well, it's given them ownership over it too. So we found that a lot of our groups just weren't confident at all in what they were doing, and we had to spell it out for them how amazing they were, and it went a long way to boost their confidence. I did that with one particular group, and now we literally cannot get rid of them, which is lovely. So they rent our space now, the same room that they had their missions and mindsets and missions sessions in. They rent that space every week, every Thursday afternoon. They are now part of the Xplore family, and they won't go, which is good, by the way. One thing I had to remind some of our science communicators is that they were there to facilitate and not lead. So it doesn't matter what they want to get out of it, or if they've had a fantastic idea, I will look for funding for their idea at some point in the future. But for that project, it was all about the community group and listening to what they wanted. It was a huge learning curve, especially we've got some really loud voices in our organisation. So it was nice to give them the chance to kind of just sit back, listen and reflect. We also found that if the community groups feel like it's their project, they will run with it, and you will have to chase them. So there was quite a few times where we just saw that tipping point where it went from us going, come on guys, what do you think? Like, what about this? What about that? And then all of a sudden we're being told, can we get this? Can we get that? Can you do this for me? And we're like, whoa, where did all this come from? So because we gave them the agency to tell us to basically shut up and listen to them, they led with it, and it was a really nice project in the end. And I suppose the last thing is the whole point of Mindsets and Missions was for us to go in without any idea of what we were supposed to do. So the whole tearing it down and starting again, it's scary as hell, but it totally works. So
Wow. And you didn't even mention custard creams and beanbags in your advice.
I mean, like, custard creams are brilliant, but I'm a Jaffa
Careful
cake.
what can be done. Oh,
Jaffa cakes. They're not a biscuit.
Brilliant.
And we had a very long conversation about this. They are not a biscuit. Never mind the tax thing. They are a cake, but yeah, they're really nice, whether they're stale or not, apparently.
But a beautiful example about transforming the place of a museum and its community.
Yes, we totally changed. Yeah, we changed our like, you know, our space to suit them. And then when we went out and we did it with the other groups, when we were going to their spaces, we didn't change their place. We changed us instead. So we
with their energy,
slopped
their
into
journey.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
No.
And so I'm going to come to Sarah. Now, I know you're just at the kind of mobilizing point of your work, but you've got a kind of deep history and background in working in this way. So why don't you bring all of that to life for us and kind of some of what you've learned?
I'll try. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Pearson. I'm Professor of Social Research at Sheffield Hallam University. My research broadly is around community regeneration, community participation and engagement, and the relationships between communities and local stakeholders in the context of place. And I've been doing that for about 25 to 30 years now, so quite a long history of working in this area. I'm also, as Kersten said, co-director of the Centre for Collaboration and Community Connectedness. We do call it C4 because it's much, much easier to deal with. But actually, each one of those Cs is quite important to us. A centre because we are a UKRI-funded centre working across the UK. Collaboration because we are a partnership of academic organisations, Sheffield Hallam University working with Queen's University Belfast, London Metropolitan University and the University of Stirling. Some charity partners, which includes the Young Foundation, with whom we're working very closely, and local trust. And I think critically for the purposes of our discussions today, we're also working very closely with 5 community partners. and they're community partners from across the UK who are co-funded in exactly the same way as the academic partners and the charity partners are, to be on the leadership of the research centre and to work on an equal basis with us in designing, developing and delivering the research agenda for the centre. And community connectedness, because that's our research agenda. We are interested in, we have a shared objective in understanding what works in supporting, delivering and sustaining connected communities across the UK. And we define connected communities as places where people have good relationships with each other, where they express pride and a sense of belonging in the place that they live, where they have trust in each other and in local agencies, and where they have opportunities and resources which support them to come together, to participate in civic life and to address the challenges that they're facing. So place is kind of, it's our research agenda, really. It's inherent in what we're interested in looking at. And place is an important reference point for us in building new knowledge. Without putting too fine a point on it, people live in places. And, you know, we've heard a lot of examples today around, you know, the really, really rich agenda for community-led research in bringing people's lived experience to our creation of knowledge. And despite, I think, what we've seen in sort of policy agendas around an interest and a renewed interest in place, actually a lot of policy pretty much ignores places. Policy doesn't pay too much attention to place. And of course, what we know is that policies impact differently in different places. And community-led research is really, really valuable in surfacing people's lived experiences of the differential impacts of those policies, particularly in underserved communities. So place is really important in understanding kind of what works, but it's also, I think, critically important in building innovation. So understanding not only what works, but also actually what works here, what works in this place in which we are living and working. And colleagues up at the back there mentioned that one of the things that we is really important to us in C4 is this concept of community catapults. And they are place-based partnerships which are led by those community organisations. So we have MDA in Belfast, we have the Brixton Project in London, Darnall Wellbeing in Sheffield, Clackmannanshire Third Sector Interface, which is in Alloa in Scotland, and the Black Mountains College, which is in Talgarth in Powys in Wales. And each of those community organisations is leading a place-based collaboration between residents, researchers and policy stakeholders within an area to come together to deliver community-led research which addresses shared social challenges. So, as I said, I've been doing this for quite a while, so thought a little bit about what's important in kind of place-based working, particularly through the lens of community-led research and innovation. And I think Claire alluded to this. And the first is the kind of reflection on what do we mean by place? And I don't want to get into a long existential debate about definitions of place, but I think the important thing to remember is that people will have very different perceptions around that and very different understandings. And it can be quite subjective and quite emotional for people as well. And very rarely do we find that people's perceptions around place and natural communities coincide with administrative boundaries or the kind of the understandings of place that policy stakeholders might bring to the conversation. They're rarely the same. And actually, what we know from our work in neighbourhoods is that when we're working at the very local level, people can have really, really clearly defined understandings of place that narrow down to a number of streets or an estate. And so what that actually means is when we're working on place-based community-led research and innovation, we're probably actually working in a number of different places. And each of those different places will have different needs, different strengths, different assets and different priorities. And we'll be working with a whole range of stakeholders. And again, those stakeholders will have different priorities, different needs, and will have different agendas around place. Some of them won't be set up for place-based working at all. Those that are will probably be doing it in very different ways, working with very different geographies. And finally, I just want to reflect again on the issue of resources. And this isn't just about funding. I think we've heard a lot today, and we all agree that community-led research and innovation needs proper funding, needs long-term funding, needs patient funding. But also different places have different assets and different resources that they can bring to the table. You know, I work in a city that has two big universities, has an FE college, lots of other resources. Some more rural communities, some seaside communities may not have access to those sorts of assets. So we need to think about the resources in place as well, and to bring those things into the conversation, and to give them consideration when we're doing place-based working.
I think that's an incredibly important point to finish on. That whole asset-based approach to supporting this work is, I always felt one of the big jobs really for any of us is to identify what a place has got going for us and build on that rather than the deficit mentality, and also to really get underneath and understand the DNA of place, the stories it's carrying, the heritage of it, and what that makes possible and not really. We're going to run out of time, which can't quite believe. It's not enough time. I know, are you telling me to wrap up, Jess? 2 minutes. I wanted just to try and get your thoughts around how all of this work can have a relationship with healthy democratic practice. And I ask that because of kind of some of the things that are going on at the moment, and also the shifting arrangements for governing our places at the moment, because actually that can dislocate energy and engagement, as well as provide new opportunities, as you've said, Lauren. So I don't know, and it's probably, and with apologies to Claire, it's probably more for Lauren and Sarah, who are kind of engaged with those kind of policymakers and the shifting places where power is and resources are. Yeah. Do you want just, because I know you've got Kim up in the northeast, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, what I would say a little bit about my experience, at least with the CIPs, rather than speaking with around the northeast context, is that actually the notion of policy can be really intimidating.
Yeah.
It's quite like a scary word for people. And certainly that was the experience with our CIPs, and we worked really hard to give them kind of dedicated policy support, wraparound support, because we asked them to create different work for different audiences, and that included like a kind of version of a policy paper that was informed by the work they had done with their communities and their partners. So that was they kind of collectively created that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something that needs to be done really around kind of policy, like almost literacy.
Or reframing what policy's all
or reframing what it is, because it's not necessarily a scary thing. It's just kind of
how do we do things around here?
It's just kind of the way things work, and actually, giving people a sense that they could potentially have some input in that, right? And that's kind of ultimately what the Creative Communities model is about, and what we kind of want to champion with our CIPs and their partners and who they're working with is, you've got an opportunity here to remake things as they shift and change. We're at this really transformational, pivotal kind of stage almost in society, and like, how would you want this to be? What are your aspirations for what it could be? And we've already talked about that's quite a difficult thing in a community. Communities are not homogenous. That's already been said today. There can be real
vested interests and power dynamics and
real kind of differing opinions, on how people see the future of where they are and what they do. And so there needs to be these conversations so people can hash it out, understand other people's points of view, and address those kind of divides, I think. And that's what we, argue for arts and humanities and culture and creativity, the idea that
just create that space
together and build that dialogue.
Wonderful. Really important point, I think, there about the language around policy and what we actually mean by it, and enable others to engage with it. So we can shift the dial, because it's about making change for continuous change. So Sarah, kind of over to you then.
So my point would be about clarity of objectives, I think. We know from experience that, and we heard it in earlier sessions, around communities sometimes feeling over-researched. And I think part of that is sometimes that promises are made which can't then be delivered on. And we've heard lots and lots and lots of examples where, policymakers come to communities, say, tell us what you want, tell us what your priorities are, do the research, and communities go away and do the hard work, do the research, come to the table with some priorities, and then policy stakeholders will say, actually, no, that's not possible. We can't respond to that. We can't do that for all sorts of potentially quite valid reasons. But the important point, I think, is around having that clarity of objectives from the very start, so that you're having that shared conversation on the basis of a common knowledge base around what you're there for and what the purpose of community-led research is.
Fantastic. Now, I'm being told to wrap up. So I feel like we've only scratched the surface on what is actually quite an important debate about how you enable community-led research and innovation to be really effective in a place context, particularly in the complex and changing landscape of place. But I think I take away some of the kind of abiding messages from today around go where the energy is. Yeah, take the journey, follow it, support it, rather than dictate it and control. Be really clear from the off what the journey you're going to take. You can't always predict the outcome, actually, but you can really clear the journey you're going to take. And actually, your point, I think, that you made about policy being quite a scary term, it's little understood, actually, even within the institutions I've worked with, worked with. So really understanding what that means so that community-led research and innovation that energy and power can be harnessed alongside the process of thinking, how do we do things around here for the betterment of the whole community in all its ways? But can I just ask you to say thank you to the whole panel for this contribution? Well done.